911, what are you reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
What are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Dia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
Hey guys, and welcome to this week's bonus episode of Sasquatch Odyssey. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us for the show. It is Sunday. This is a bonus show for you guys. As promised, I am bringing you the Betty and Barney Hill UFO abduction story from our sister podcast, Paranormal Odyssey. This is something that I teased a couple of weeks back, and I'm so excited to have this interview to bring to you guys. I know some of you guys are Sasquatch purists, and you're probably not into the UFO and some of the other paranormal stuff, so I get that. But I definitely think this is worth a listen. Kathleen Marden is not only a very well-known and very highly respected UFO investigator, she is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. She was with her mother, Betty Hill's sister, got the call shortly after the incident took place, and Betty and Barney were actually at her house just a few days after this incident took place. So Kathleen was there from the very beginning. And she's done a ton of research and a ton of legwork that has went into the books that she's written. She wrote the book Captured about the Betty and Barney Hill experience. We talk a little bit about the book in the interview tonight. But in addition to that inside track of her wealth of knowledge about what actually happened during this incident, for me, I was very curious about how this incident affected Betty and Barney Hill as people. Because we lose track of that, I think, sometimes when people share their encounter stories or share the experiences that they've had, whether it be with Sasquatch or Dogman or even UFOs, ghost stories, whatever. At the end of the day, they're still people. And these things happen to real people. So I was very curious to figure out and to talk to Kathleen about how this incident took place in the early 60s to an interracial couple, and then the firestorm of the media and the things that happened afterwards, and how that affected them as people. So we talk a little bit about that in the interview. So the other thing is the interview is really long, or it appears to be when you look at this on your podcast player. Part of that is after my hour or so interview with Kathleen, I decided to include the actual audio of Barney Hill's hypnosis. He underwent hypnosis, and that's how he recalled a lot of the things that happened during the incident. So I'm including that audio after the interview with Kathleen. I am throwing that caveat out there that I am certainly strongly advising listener discretion. Some of the things that you hear in the tape, some of the images that are talked about, and some of the just pure emotion that comes out on this audio is pretty powerful and can be very disturbing for certain people. I think younger listeners, parents, I strongly advise parental discretion in addition to listener discretion. So I'm just going to throw that out there. It is at the end of the interview with Kathleen. So when you think the interview's over, stick around. It's about another 40 minutes, but I certainly think if you're interested in this, it's certainly worth the listen. So that said, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to let the music play. Kathleen's ready to go. I hope you guys enjoy it. You guys sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
When you first become president, one of the questions that people ask you is, what's really going on at Area 51? I think I just became the first president to ever publicly mention Area 51.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
I had people go look at the records on Area 51 to make sure there was no alien down there. I had all the Roswell papers reviewed, everything.
If you saw that there were aliens there, would you tell us?
Yeah.
You would?
I mean, if there's some huge national security thing and I can't get agreement to open them, I won't. But I do want to open them because I'm interested.
Do you believe?
I don't know. But there are enough stories out there that I don't think everybody is just sitting, in their kitchen making them up. I think that people see things. What they see, I don't know.
That certain morning, I happened to look over into the sky to the northeast, and I seen a very, very bright light up there, like a very bright star. And then I said, well, that's moving. And I just stood there and watched it as what it was doing, and it was just coming down out of the sky real slow, and no noise. Just quiet, and I couldn't see no wings or nothing, just floating right through the midair up there. And I thought, well, if I don't tell nobody that I seen something go over town tonight, nobody will believe me tomorrow.
Hey guys, and welcome to this week's episode of Paranormal Odyssey. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us for the show. It is Sunday. I hope you guys have had an amazing week. We've got a great guest lined up for you, but as always, I want to start the show by inviting you. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. You can get me at paranormalodysseypodcast@gmail.com. I want to get right into it tonight, folks. I'm really excited about the guest. I teased this a couple of weeks back and told you guys that we were going to be talking about the Betty and Barney Hill UFO abduction case. This case happened back in 1961. I don't think it was the first abduction case, but it certainly was the first publicized and thoroughly investigated UFO abduction case outside of the Travis Walton case ever. So I'm very excited to have Kathleen on. She is actually the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. They showed up at her house a couple of days after this incident took place, and she got to see the evidence. She still has some of the physical evidence left behind from this abduction case. So it's fascinating, and she certainly has the inside track on it, and she's done a lot of investigations. So I wanted to talk to Kathleen about not only what happened during the incident, but what happened afterwards, right? How did this affect Betty and Barney Hill as people? Because that's one of the things I think that gets lost in a lot of these stories is these were people this happened to, right? Whether you believe the story or not, whether you believe that they were abducted by aliens or whatever it is that you believe, something happened to them. And there was certainly an aftermath with that, right? It was very highly publicized and a lot of people investigating and prodding and poking them for information. So that was definitely one of the things that I wanted to talk to Kathleen tonight, and we talk a little bit about that aftermath and what happened to Betty and Barney after that. One of the things that I wrestled with, but I ultimately decided to include in this episode is, after the interview is over with Kathleen, there's about a 40-minute audio tape of the actual hypnosis session that Barney Hill went under when he recalled a lot of the things that happened to him. So you're going to hear the actual tape of him the audio of him being hypnotized and reliving some of those actual moments that Kathleen and I talk about during the interview. I have to tell you up front, I'm certainly doing a caveat here for listener discretion. Some of the things that you hear in that tape are very disturbing. I just want to throw that out there for you guys. If you got kids that are listening to this, I don't think you want them to listen to that part of it. But I'll leave that completely up to you. I'm just going to put the warning in there. It is rather disturbing. I just want to throw that out there for you guys. It is after the interview. It's about an additional 40 minutes. Even if you don't listen to it all the way through, come back to it later and listen to the tape, because it's very rare that you have a case like this where we're talking to somebody 40 plus years after the incident takes place, and then you actually get to hear the story told in the words of the person who experienced it. So I say give that a listen. I hope you guys enjoy the show. Kathleen's on the line. I'm going to stop talking. She's ready to go. You guys sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. All right, I want to welcome our guest tonight. It's Kathleen Martin. Welcome to the show, Kathleen.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Absolutely. It's fantastic to have you. I'm so excited to get to talk a little bit about this story. This Betty and Barney Hill abduction case has fascinated me for years, and many people that are into the paranormal and the UFO thing. So if you would, for those that don't know the story, let's start with how you were involved in this and what is your connection to that. And then sort of, if you would take us into the story of what happened to Betty and Barney Hill on that fateful night.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, I had a lot to do with what happened to Betty and Barney Hill because I had been to Niagara Falls the previous month with Betty's sister, June, and her husband, and my cousin, who was just a year younger than me. And we had a wonderful time at Niagara Falls. I took lots of photographs, and Betty and Barney were visiting my childhood home. I was 13 years old. And I was showing them the photographs and talking about the trip. And Barney said to Betty, "Have you been to Niagara Falls?" And she said, "No, I haven't been." And he said, "Well, do you think you'd like to go sometime?" And she said she would. And so in September, he decided to surprise her with a trip during her week off as a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. And he took a few days off. He worked for the U.S. Post Office in Boston, Massachusetts at the time. He took a few days off and surprised Betty, and off they were on their trip to Niagara Falls. And they spent the night on the Canadian side, had a leisurely drive the following day to 112 miles west of Montreal, spent the next day vacationing and seeing the sights in Montreal, and we're going to spend the night at a motel on the outskirts of town. They had their dog, Delcy, with them. She was a dachshund. And Barney found himself on the wrong route as he was leaving Montreal, but it was a route that it was going to take them back to New Hampshire. So he thought, oh, the heck with it. I have lots of energy anyway. I'm not tired. We'll just drive on home. And so he thought, well, if they grew tired, then they could stop for the night along the way. So they continued on their vacation. They stopped at a beautiful little town, a tourist town in Quebec. And then they stopped. They had a little bite to eat, and they continued after that, driving on through Vermont and down into Colebrook, New Hampshire, where they stopped again and had another little bite to eat and a cup of coffee, because in those days, nothing was open late at night. It was not a very populated state. It's a lot different than that right now. But so they had their coffee, and they were driving south, and the next town down is Lancaster. So about 4 miles south of Lancaster, Betty noticed a new light in the sky. And the odd thing about it is that it didn't move like a falling star or anything else she'd ever seen. It moved upwards into the sky from down below, shot up, and so she was just watching it, wondering what it might be. And then it started coming in closer and closer. It was a bright light night, and the moon was about 3/4 full. And as they approached Twin Mountain, which was about an hour south of that, Betty wanted Barney to stop the car so she could get a look at this thing. And he was saying, "Oh, Betty, forget about it. Let's just go home." And she said, "Well, Delcy needs to go for a walk, Barney, so find a place to pull over." So he did pull over at the Mount Cleveland picnic area. He got the leash, put Delcy on the leash. Betty stepped out with the binoculars. Barney walked Delcy, and then he took the binoculars and looked up at this thing. He could see that it was fairly large in the sky, at least larger than a plane or a star. And he was very surprised because it was heading toward the west, and then suddenly, without making a circle the way a plane would, it shot back in his direction. So he decided to get back into the car, saying to Betty, "Oh, it's probably just a plane, Betty." You know, he was a confirmed skeptic, so and he was not being cooperative. He kind of liked to do that just to get her dander up, I think, sometimes. It was kind of a joking behavior they played. And so they drove south. Betty's continuing to watch this craft as it's traveling beside the car, coming in closer and closer. They entered Franconia Notch, which is a beautiful area of New Hampshire. It's unpopulated. At that time, there was just a U.S. highway going through it. Now there's an interstate that runs through. And in Franconia Notch, there's a small river, and there are mountains on each side. To your right, if you're heading south, you'll see a beautiful mountain range, Cannon Mountain ski area, the Old Man of the Mountain, which ended up falling off the mountain in 2003. That was just a natural stone structure that just looked like an old man's profile. And so Betty was saying, "Oh, Barney, stop the car again. It's coming in closer." So this time he did stop without arguing, got out of the car, and he had the binoculars. So he was looking at this thing, and it appeared to be rotating and lighted on one side. Now, the Old Man in the Mountain's profile was 48 feet from forehead to the bottom of its chin. And Betty said that the craft at that point was at least 1.5 or maybe 2 times the length of the Old Man's profile. And it just appeared to be rotating and lighted on only one side. And before they got back into the car, it was traveling in a stair-step pattern and just highly unusual. It certainly was not a conventional aircraft, but Barney was still trying to identify it as such. It was silent as well. They exited Franconia Notch. They went past the Indian Head Resort, and a mile south of there, Betty became very excited. And she said, "Barney, you have to stop the car. We need to look at this again. It's coming in really close." But before he could find a place to pull off to the side of the road, the craft surged ahead and stopped over the road, and just over the side of the road that he was driving on, causing him to have to pull into the middle of the road so that he wouldn't be directly underneath it. Now, I've worked on other cases where people have tried to drive underneath it, and they've ended up inside it. So, and then find themselves on a completely different stretch of road. So, Barney did stop the car. He took the binoculars. He got out, he's looking up at this craft, and he sees what he described as appearing to be a giant pancake hovering silently just 200 feet overhead. They could see windows, they could see blue-white lights, very bright lights coming through those windows. And as Barney stepped back away from the car, he left the door open. As he stepped back, the craft then moved to an adjacent field just to the east. And Barney walked to the edge of the field, holding the binoculars up to his eyes, still trying to identify it, shaking his head, pulling the binoculars down. And as he was looking through his binoculars, he saw figures looking back at him. He remembered this consciously. This was not something that came out through hypnosis. He remembered this all along. And what he said, and Betty wrote, when she wrote to the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, is that Barney saw figures dressed in shiny black uniforms, and that he became extraordinarily frightened by them and ran screaming back to the car that they had to get out of there or they were going to be abducted. So he's running back to the car. He gets in. He shifts the car into gear. He had left it running, and he starts speeding down the highway. But as he was leaving that field, he noticed that the car was heading in his direction. He told Betty to roll down the window and look up. She did. She was expecting to see lights from the craft. She didn't. All she saw was blackness. And then she and Barney realized that the craft was over the top of the car when they heard a series of code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of the car. It caused the car to vibrate and a tingling sensation to pass through their bodies. The next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the highway with spotty memories of what had happened in the interim. They did recall finding themselves on a dirt road with tall trees all around, observing a fiery orb that might have been sitting on the ground. They thought maybe it was the moon at first, but it wasn't the moon. The moon is not like that, and the moon had already set that night. And also a roadblock. They didn't know where or when it occurred, but those were their memories. They drove on, and they finally arrived home expecting that it would be, between 2 and 3 a.m. It was after 5 o'clock in the morning. And Barney went into the house first while Betty walked the dog Dulcie. And when he went into the bathroom, he went to take off his shoes, and he noticed that the toes of the shoes were so deeply scraped that he ended up having to buy new shoes. He had no memory of how that had occurred. Betty walked the dog. She went into the house, and when she took her dress off, she noticed that it was torn in several places. Actually, there was a 2-inch tear in the stitching in the zipper that ran along the back of the dress, a 1-inch tear in the thick zipper fabric, and the hem was torn down on one side, and the lining was torn from waist to hemline. She couldn't remember how that happened. She'd just been sitting in the car, and it was in fine condition when she put it on that morning. So they had amnesia to what happened in that 2-hour period of missing time. They saw that the binocular strap was broken. Their watches had stopped working and never worked again. In fact, I have the watch that Betty was wearing that night, and it's still set for 5:15 a.m. Because she thought that her watch had stopped working, so she set it for the time that it was when she looked at the clock and wound it, and it never worked again. So there were all these things. Now, I was 13 years old, and I was home from school in the afternoon when I heard my mother speaking with Betty. And there was concern in my mother's voice and Betty's voice over what had happened the night before. Now, we had a neighbor who was a physicist, and my mother said that she would call the physicist and get back to Betty with his suggestion. So Betty and Barney were really concerned that maybe they had been exposed to cosmic rays, and they had taken long showers. And my mother called the physicist and then called Betty back and said, well, he said if you have a compass, you should take it out to the car to see how the needle reacts. Well, Betty and my mother assumed that that meant radiation. They were not talking about heat radiation. They were talking about a magnetic field around, and Betty did find a magnetic field around the trunk of the car. And she found new shiny spots that hadn't been there the day before, right in that area where she and Barney heard those buzzing sounds striking the night before. So many, many mysteries. They decided to call Pease Air Force Base and make a Project Blue Book report because my father's best friend arrived for his nightly cup of coffee and said he had been the chief of police in Newton, New Hampshire, and he advised Betty and Barney to call Pease Air Force Base. Pease had contacted the local police stations and asked them to ask people who had UFO sightings to call them. So that's what Betty and Barney did, being good citizens. They made a Project Blue Book report. And then, since Betty and Barney knew nothing about UFOs, Betty went to the Portsmouth Public Library. They lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, near the seacoast, and she took out the first book she'd ever read. It happened to be written by Donald Kehoe, who was the director of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, and there was an address in the book, and to write to NICAP if they had a UFO sighting. So she and Barney sat down. She was the typist, and she, in this letter, wrote about the flight pattern, the odd flight pattern, the silent craft. She even sketched the flight pattern, up and down flight pattern. She talked about how the craft had surged down and that Barney had gotten out of the car, that he had held the binoculars to his eyes, and he had observed those entities or those figures dressed in black, shiny uniforms. And they frightened him greatly, and she wrote that they were looking for a good hypnotist who could help Barney to overcome the mental block that he had developed for what their faces looked like. So that was in their mind immediately. I know it was played out differently in the first book that was ever written, but that was not consistent with the archival records. And I did a very thorough investigation and have all of the archival records and interviewed all of the early investigators who were still alive at the time that I was doing my research on Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. The second edition, updated edition, has just been released this year with new scientific evidence and new information since the first one was published. And it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, other online bookstores in many, many formats. But if you would like to purchase a autographed copy with both Stanton Friedman, nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman, who wrote about the star map because he was very actively involved in that investigation. So you can just contact me at my website, Kathleen-Marden, MARDEN.com, and purchase the copy directly from me, autographed. Betty and Barney were very curious, and Betty would not let it alone. She wanted to know what happened. Barney's attitude was, nothing good can come of this. Let's just forget about it, Betty. So that's what he wanted to do. but he was traumatized. Those entities that he remembered seeing who were so threatening that made him think that they were about to capture him like, quote, a bug in a net, caused trauma. And eventually, Barney ended up developing bleeding ulcers, high blood pressure. He had to be hospitalized because of the bleeding ulcers. He had to take a 3-month leave of absence from work. And this is when they were referred to Dr. Benjamin Simon, who was a psychiatrist in Boston, Massachusetts. Dr. Simon was famous for a special hypnotic technique that he had developed to work with soldiers who were returning from the front during World War II. He set up the neuropsychiatry unit at the Mason General Hospital on Long Island, New York, and had a great deal of success in treating these people who were coming home and had physiological symptoms that were psychogenically induced. And so it wasn't just a matter of treating them for seeing their best friend's head blown off in the foxhole next to them. There was more. And Dr. Simon wrote about this, and he talked about how he had to get beyond that trauma in this soldier's memory and move beyond that. And what he found out is that the soldier had received a Dear John letter from his sweetheart a couple of weeks before that occurred. And it was a combination of the two that caused this great shock that made this soldier blind. And Dr. Simon successfully treated him. In fact, the propaganda movie, Let There Be Light, a John Huston wartime movie, featured Dr. Simon and his work. So he was pretty extraordinary. And he was the perfect person for Barney to see to treat his symptoms. Betty went to the first appointment with Barney, and she said, I had a series of dreams that occurred just before I woke up in the morning. And part of them were things that I remember, but part contained an alien abduction. And the creatures in this alien abduction had black hair. They were very human-looking, eyebrows, regular human face, large noses, dressed in blue cadets uniforms, and they were friendly, and they took Betty and Barney onto the craft and then returned them. And so that was what Betty dreamed about. She wanted to know if her dreams really happened. And I wanted to know that, too. I wanted to know if Betty and Barney were only expanding upon Betty's dreams in hypnosis. Maybe they weren't really abducted. So I did a comparative analysis of their statements. I have all of the hypnosis tapes. From the very beginning of the trip, I studied their style of speaking, their the attention each paid to detail, and I compared their statements when they were together during that period of amnesia, because Dr. Simon was very smart. When he hypnotized one of them, he reintroduced amnesia at the end of the session, so they couldn't remember what they had remembered, and he recorded under hypnosis. They couldn't compare stories. So that was really good for me to have, to do this comparative analysis. And it was long and boring, but it's not long and boring in the book. It just tells all of the facts, and it's highly readable and entertaining. So I found evidence that Betty and Barney really were abducted. In addition to that physical evidence, how would you get that physical evidence if nothing had happened? They just had a pleasant ride home. So under hypnosis, he took them for a period of 6 months. After about 4 months, he took them together and let them listen to the tapes while he did therapy with them to help them integrate those memories into their conscious mind and overcome the trauma. Because not only did Barney experience trauma, but Betty had her own working through to do. So that was very successful. They never intended to tell their story to anyone except for the family, their good friends, their church couples club, the investigators and scientists. But there was a violation of confidentiality in 1965, and a newspaper reporter from Boston, Massachusetts, published their story, and that really upset Betty and Barney. I was about 17 years old then, and they came down to my grandparents' childhood home. My childhood home was across the street from my grandparents' farm. That's what I meant to say. We all met as a family and talked about what to do next. Betty and Barney feared that they would lose their jobs, their reputations would be destroyed. They were active in politics. In 1965, they had been invited to Lyndon Johnson's inauguration, and they went and they took me. Barney had received an award from the Archdiocese of Manchester, New Hampshire, for setting up a literacy program in the state when you had to take a literacy test in order to vote. Barney had been appointed to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, State Advisory Committee, and also he had received an award from Sergeant Shriver, who was the head of the Federal Poverty Program, for the work he had done to set up the Rockingham County Community Action Program, and he was the first volunteer chairman of the board of directors. So they were both very active in this politics, and so they were facing having their good reputations destroyed, and that's what happened.
There's so many things I want to talk about the abduction itself, but let's just stay on that track for a moment. What happened after the story broke? What were the consequences for them? What kind of negative things happened, or did anything negative happen to them once the story broke to the public, once it was broken out to the public and told to the public? Did they experience any of those repercussions that they had worried about?
Okay, well, the first thing they did is we as a family decided that it would be okay to speak about the UFO sighting, but not the abduction. So Betty and Barney did agree to speak at a church in Dover, New Hampshire in early November. They were introduced by the public information officer from Pease Air Force Base, who told the audience that they had received many sightings of UFOs. And then Betty and Barney spoke. There were military people who were very interested in their case, and some military people who were supporting Betty and Barney. So they had a good support group. But then people who didn't know them were making ridiculous statements that questioned their credibility. And as time went on, the story spun out of control, so that these, especially the government disinformants that I wrote about in my book with Stanton Friedman, Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers, those individuals rewrote the entire story, adding false information and speculation that caused the public to believe that they really didn't have this experience, that all they ever saw was a light in the sky, that Betty was fantasy prone, that she'd always been a UFO fan throughout her lifetime, on and on and on, all complete nonsense. But the public believed it. In fact, this was very stressful for Barney. He had a fatal cerebral hemorrhage in February of 1969, and that's when I moved in with Betty after Barney passed away, because her home was being entered. I saw some of this myself. I wrote about it in Captured. There was a psychological operation being conducted against Betty. and they just wanted to push her over the edge. She was already grieving, having lost such a wonderful husband. And who else could she share that experience with? They were the only ones, as far as she knew, who had had this kind of experience. And here she was alone with this, and the house being entered and the phone being tapped. And so I moved in and lived with her for a while. She finally ended up having one of the early security systems installed in her house that was wired into the police station.
So back to the night of the abduction. They went under hypnosis, obviously, and recalled what happened. Can you talk about some of the things that they actually remembered that happened to them while they were in the abduction scenario with these creatures?
Yes. Betty remembered how her dress was torn when she fought for her life when they were taking her onto the craft. And then again, when they tried to unzip the dress but didn't know how to unzip a zipper, she had to help with it after they'd broken it. And Barney remembered how he had damaged his shoes when he felt like he was floating. His arms were out. He was somehow being supported, and only the toes of his shoes were bumping along the rocks. So they were taken into separate examining rooms. They were given physical examinations. These entities were very interested in the difference between themselves and human bodies. They were interested in our skeletal system, our muscular system. They examined Betty's and Barney's hands. Their hands were different than the ETs. Their hair, these ETs didn't have any hair. They looked into their mouths, and actually Barney felt what felt like a finger going into his mouth, and he didn't realize it, I guess, at the time, but his dentures were removed. And they went to the next room with dentures and tried to see if Betty's teeth were removable, too. These entities didn't have teeth. They looked into Betty's and Barney's eyes. And, of course, our eyes are different. Their eyes were larger and very intense. I think that it had to do with the telepathic communication, the messages that they were sending to Betty and Barney maybe directly into their brains. So they also, years before amniocentesis was being used in hospitals in this country, that's what happened to Betty. They put her on a table and they inserted a needle into her navel. It was very painful. But the one that she called the leader, that I now call the escort, because that's the ET who accompanies most experiencers today from the time they're young children. Well, he's the one who took away Betty's pain, and she had a good relationship with. Barney had essentially the same kind of test that Betty had, only they took a sperm sample from Barney. And while that was happening, Betty was in the room with the one that she called the leader, and she picked up what she called a book. It was more to like what we think today is a tablet. There were rows of symbols embedded in that tablet, and she was able to sketch those symbols for me. They're in my book, and you'll also read about a scientific study that was done on symbols that Betty drew and others have drawn that they have seen on the craft. And then Betty said to the leader, "I know you're not from around here. Where's your home port?" And so he produced, out of a wall, he pulled out this kind of star map that was almost like a hologram or like looking out of a window. There were about a dozen stars connected by lines. Some were broken lines, and those broken lines represented expeditions. There were solid lines that represented trade routes. And he said to Betty, "Do you know where you are on the map?" And she said, "No, I know very little about the universe." And he said, "Well, if you don't know where you're from, where you are, how can I tell you where I am?" And so he put the map away, and Betty was very unhappy about that, but at least she had the book. But they took that away from her as she was leaving the craft. She fought for it, and as she was being escorted back to the car, the leader apologized to her for frightening her so badly. They had been reassuring Betty and Barney that they wouldn't harm them, but Betty didn't believe them. So he apologized, and Betty said, well, I can arrange for people who are more knowledgeable than me to meet with you. Do you think you can come back? And he said, maybe I can. It's not my decision to make, but maybe I can. And Betty said, well, how would you find me? Out of all of the millions of people on this planet, how would you find me? And he said, we can always find those we want to find. So I don't know if she had an implant put in that night, or if it was another time, maybe earlier in her life, and she just never remembered any of it. But that's, in a nutshell, that has taken 37 minutes. That is what happened to Betty and Barney. There's much more in my book.
I'm fascinated with the entire story, and I've talked to other people, and I've had people on the show that have had abduction experiences, and they talk about some of the very similar things. And I know you've been researching this for years and years, and I want to talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
I want to go back to that night, and I know that they ended up doing the Project Blue Book report, and they reported it, did their due diligence. Was there ever any sort of corroboration? Did anybody else in that area see this craft, or anybody else report anything weird or strange that night?
Well, I've received calls from a couple of servicemen who saw the craft that night. It wasn't in that part of New Hampshire. It was in Maine, and it was moving in that direction that Betty and Barney were traveling in. I also found a letter that Stanton Friedman wrote to John Luttrell, who was the reporter who broke the story in that Boston newspaper. And Stanton wanted to know if John had retained his files and if he had ever found any witnesses to the craft that night. John wrote back and said that he was no longer working at the newspaper, and when he left, he'd simply destroyed the files. He didn't think he'd ever need them again, but that he did interview during his investigation for the article 12 to 14 people. They weren't in a group. They were scattered about in different places in that area that Betty and Barney were in. They had all seen a craft of the same description, and he knew that it was the craft that Betty and Barney saw because he drew lines from their location to the position that Betty and Barney were in at various times. And they intersected. So, yes, there were witnesses as well. I've written a lot more about that in Captured, in the update.
I cannot wait to get my autographed copy. I'm going to be the first in line for that after the interview. But I do want to talk about some of the similarities to some of the other cases. In your research, you've clearly dealt with people who have had abduction experiences after Betty and Barney. So some of the things that, like one of the most famous cases besides the Betty and Barney Hill case is the Travis Walton case. And Travis talks it sounded like what you were describing that they remembered, the entities that were actually performing these medical experiments and doing the things that were happening during the abduction were very different from what Betty remembered in her dream. And clearly
absolutely.
Clearly we're speculating as to whether those creatures were real or dreamed or whatever the case may be. But Travis Walton had a very similar experience with humanoid type creatures that made him feel way more at ease because they were more human-like. Have you had other cases where people have described that and there's the two different types of entities? And if so, what is your thought on that? What do you believe the connection there is?
Many, many cases that I've investigated include at least two different types of entities on the same craft. I wrote it in my book with Denise Stoner, the Alien Abduction Files, about Denise's lifelong experiences, her husband too. It's a case that reminded me of a lot of Betty and Barney's case, lots of evidence as well. And there were mantis types working with a gray, sort of humanoid gray. And then there were the small worker bee type grays who she said they were soldiers. And she said that they might have been robotic or bio-robotic, that they stood against the wall and were not and did not move unless they were instructed to. So, that was an incredible story. And Denise has continued to have experiences through much of her lifetime. They ended about 5 years ago. There were many other cases, too. Had more recently a very good case out of North Carolina. I was MUFON's director of the Experiencer Research Team for 10 years. So we received about 100 reports a week. No, a month, not a week, excuse me. And the team started out with 3 people. When I took on the job as director, when I left due to time constraints, there was nothing wrong with the job. It was just that I'm extraordinarily busy. So, and my husband was sick, so I stepped down. But we had 50 investigators by the time I left the team. So there was a whole lot of knowledge being shared in the team, too. And this case that I was talking about which is a very big case, involved 3 people. 2 of them were paranormal researchers with a very good reputation. In fact, Stanton Friedman, nuclear physicist, introduced me to them because they had spoken at a conference that he had spoken at, and they had talked about theoretical physics, and he was very impressed by their level of scientific knowledge. So he introduced them to me, and they wanted to do an experiment where they would go to the home of a confirmed abductee, and they would set up their equipment, and they would try a CE5 experiment and see if they could call in, the experiencer could call in a craft, and then they would try to talk to that craft and maybe collect voice recordings, EVPs. So I arranged for that to happen. They went to that experiencer's house, and they had all their equipment set up. It's about 10 o'clock at night. They see a craft in the sky. It's coming in brighter and brighter next to the moon. Chris is the experiencer is saying that I think that's one of them. And so Pam is starting to ask questions, collect EVPs, and the next thing they knew, they were no longer holding the equipment in their hands. The equipment was on the floor behind them, and not the floor, on the ground behind them, under some bushes, and they're reeling back and forth. They're feeling nauseated. They think that only a few moments have passed. They pick their equipment up, they go into the house, and the experiencer's wife is there, and she says, "Where have you been?" And I was saying, "What do you mean, where have we been? We've been outside." And she said, "No, you weren't. I was looking for you." She said, "Do you realize what time it is? It's 1 o'clock in the morning." And that is when they knew they had missing time. Now, the 2 women drank a lot of coffee and drove back home. It was about a 3-hour drive, so they arrived very early in the morning. But after they had rested, they started to go over any evidence that they might have collected on their equipment. And on the Bell and Howell infrared camera that had been left running, they were able to capture a few seconds of extraterrestrials moving along a purplish beam of light. They were translucent as they were coming in and dropping off that light, but they became solid as they moved closer to the ground. one of them was sitting on the ground, and then he lifted up into the air, and he had a blue light. That's the light that he would shine at the experiencer to take them on the beam into the craft. They're absorbed into the beam. And he had a white light in the other hand, and he's flying across the screen, looking back and forth for the people that he was about ready to take to craft. And then there was a huge flash of light from that craft, and you saw a full-size figure standing on the ground, dressed in black. He had sleeves that remind me of accordion-pleated sleeves. He was wearing headgear on his head, and on the sides of his head, you could see just a little tiny bit of his head and his chiseled nose that was sticking out. On that craft, I ended up hypnotizing both of those experiencers separately, and they were taken by different types of entities. One entity, we believe, was the mantis type. They appear like that. She also was able to capture the sounds that they make, and I've compared those sounds to other mantis sounds, and they were identical. And they were human types, with men dressed in blue uniforms, very kind, caring. There were two women with them dressed in beautiful uniforms, and they gave her a lot of information. They said that they had at one point lived on this planet hundreds of thousands of years ago, that there had been an environmental collapse, and that they had the technology and the means to leave this planet. They left a lot of people behind, but they traveled through space until they were able to settle on another planet, and it's called, it's Adela, and that they just come back from time to time to check up on us, to assist development. So it's very, very interesting with a lot of evidence, fascinating abduction. So I'm really pleased to have been able to investigate that, and I will be actually talking about that if we're able to hold the conference in Michigan in September. You can see that on my website, where I'll be introducing those extraterrestrials in that case, along with some other photographic evidence of extraterrestrials that other experiencers have collected. I have been the investigator on the case.
And you said that case was from North Carolina?
Yes.
I actually live in North Carolina, so I'm very fascinated about that. That's amazing. I appreciate you sharing that. I know your time is valuable, and I want to be respectful of that, but I've got a couple of quick questions before we close out, if you don't mind.
Oh, no, not at all.
As far as the physical evidence, going back to Betty and Barney's abduction, the dress, the shoes, and the things that they had on, the car even, what happened to that stuff? Was it all lost to time, or?
Betty's dress has been preserved. It's at the University of New Hampshire, and I set up an archival collection at the University of New Hampshire with all of Betty's and Barney's information on their UFO experience and also on their civil rights experience at work. And so the dress ended up being degraded by some kind of a pink powdery substance that grew on the dress after she placed it in her closet, knowing that it was going to have to be repaired. When she took it out the next time, the dress was ruined. She was going to throw it away, but she decided to save it because it might hold a clue to what happened to them that night. That dress has been had chemical analysis in about 6 or 7 laboratories now. It's also undergone DNA analysis with some very interesting findings. You'll find all of that in Captured. And in regards to the other evidence, we didn't save Barney's shoes because he had used them for yard work after that. Betty just threw them away. I have the watches that they wore that night. I have the hypnosis tapes, and and I actually did see the spots on the trunk of the car, and knew that the needle whirled when Betty placed the compass over those spots. My family was at Betty's and Barney's house a couple of days after this happened to them. And that's when we heard the story ourselves. So there was ample evidence. Dr. Simon asked Betty to draw the star map and that she saw. And under two conditions, if she could remember it accurately and if it didn't trouble much. So she did go home. She sketched it, and it underwent scientific investigation. A brilliant woman from Ohio, Marjorie Fish, and it took her years, actually, to find a match. She did find a match, and that match had special properties. All of the stars on Betty's map are sun-like stars, even though only 5% of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood, out 54 light years, are sun-like. And all of the sun-like stars in that volume of space are on Betty's map. Not only that, one of the astronomers who looked at it and vetted Marjorie's work said that if we lived on Zeta Reticuli and we wanted to go to our solar system, that we would have followed the same route that those ETs showed on that map. And not only that, that those stars are in a plane. Stanton always used to compare it to pepperoni on a pizza, as opposed to raisins spread out through in a thick loaf of raisin bread. So it made it easier to travel. So, some skeptics will say, oh, you could throw marbles into the air and land in a sand pit and you could find a match. Well, maybe you could, but that match would not have those special properties. And that is what was so remarkable for the scientists who vetted Marjorie's work, who looked at that, for Stanton, who it was his first major investigation, and a big one at that. So there was a lot of evidence, and I've written about even more evidence in the new book.
And my last question for you, with your wealth of knowledge and the countless people that you've talked to that have had these types of experiences, I've only talked to a handful that have had similar experiences. And my question to them is the same question I'll ask you now. And it's clearly speculation, obviously, but what do you think is the link, or is there a link with the people that have these experiences over and over and over? Because some people I've seen a UFO. I've had a UFO experience when I was 16. I've only had one, and it was simply seeing the craft. What do you make of, or what do you think about these people that have had multiple experiences, some multiple abduction experiences? Do you think it's something in the DNA? Do you have any theories on why this happens to the same person over and over and over?
Yes, and this isn't just speculation on my part. I've worked on 3 major studies on experiencers. 2 of those studies had PhD scientists working with me. And what we discovered, we had more than 5,000 participants in all. And yes, it runs along family lines. So it's generational in 60%, and probably higher than that, but a lot of families don't talk about this. What the ETs seem to be interested in is changing humans. They have expressed their concern over our bellicose behavior, over our barbaric behavior, and they have stated that to numerous experiencers that they are concerned that our technological progress is out of sync with our spiritual development, And when that happens, it can exterminate all life on the planet. And what they're attempting to do, they say, is to upgrade humans. And what we discovered is that experiencers have special characteristics, and they change, and their children are changed. They are more spiritual. 86% of the abductees said they were more spiritual. They are 65% say they're psychic. 95% said that they are empaths, and that means that they have a psychic sense where they can feel whether another person is ill. They can feel their emotions as if they're their own. It's brilliant on the part of these ETs because you can't harm another person. You can't hurt a person if you're going to feel the pain that you've inflicted on them. So that's pretty incredible. In families, 70% of the abductees and their family members have said they observed craft at 500 feet or less. There is a longitudinal genetic study being done on lines of generations. The ETs initially, they say, randomly took people from children from farms, people who are outdoors hiking or fishing or whatever. They selected those who had the characteristics that they wanted to work with. And then they started genetically upgrading the DNA of those individuals, running through family lines. So that's what our research tells us.
Absolutely fascinating. Well, Kathleen, I thank you so much for your time. It's been an amazing conversation. The hour has flown by, and I would love to have you back at some point. One last time, let's talk about Captured. If you would give your website information and where people can get the book, and I highly encourage everybody to go out and do so. So tell us where we can find it.
My website is Kathleen with a K, Kathleen dash or hyphen Marden, MARDEN.com. That's simple. The books are for sale, autographed copies. If you buy it from me, it's through PayPal. And the books are also available in bookstores, in online bookstores as well, in all different formats. I've written 6 books now, and they're ebooks, audiobooks, softcover, hardcover, you name it. So you'll find them.
There you go, folks. Kathleen Marden, KathleenMarden.com. Everybody go over and get your copy of the book. Kathleen, thank you again for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and it was a pleasure being with you this evening.
We go deeper and deeper, deeper asleep, far asleep. Deeper and deeper. Fully relaxed, all muscles are relaxed. You're comfortable, relaxed. You will not be anxious or distressed, but you will remember everything and you will tell me everything.
Yes. I think I will stop. I will stop. And I have not stopped. And Betty said, look, there's a star moving. And I look and I see a star. It's funny. But I said, Betty, that's a satellite. We are seeing a satellite. And then I pulled over to the side of the road. And Betty jumped out her side, on her side, with the binoculars. And I got the chain. And I hook it to the dog on her collar. And I say, come on, Dulcie. Let's get out. She jumps out. And I look toward the sky, and I look back to Dulcie and walk her around the trunk of the car. And I'm saying, hurry up, Betty, so I can get a look. And Betty passes the binoculars to me. And I see that this is not a satellite. It is an airplane. It is an airplane you can see. I think you can see the rows of windows. And it is an airplane. And I tell Betty this and give the binoculars back to her. And I am satisfied. And I drive, and Betty is still looking, and she says, Barney, that is not a plane. It is still following us. And I stop, and I look, and I see it is still out there, off in the distance. So I search for a place to pull off the road. And I see a dirt road to the right of the main highway. And I think this is a good place I can pull off. And if any car comes, it won't strike me. And I am thinking, this is strange, because it is still there. And Betty said, I think she said, I am mad with her. I said, I believe Betty is trying to make me think this is a flying saucer. Was it light enough to see? It was just a light moving through the sky, and I heard no noise. And I think, this is ridiculous. And Betty, it is not a flying saucer. What are you doing that for? You want to believe in this thing, and I don't. And I can't hear any sound. No sound, whatever. I want to hear a jet. Oh, I want to hear a jet so badly. I want to hear it. Why do you want to hear a jet? Because Betty is making me mad. She is making me angry because she is saying, look at that. It's strange. It's not a plane. Look at it. And I keep thinking it's got to be. And I want to hear a hum. I want to hear a motor. How far away was it? It wasn't far. It was about 1,000 feet, I guess. 1,000 feet. 1,000 feet. Did it go back and forth, or did it go in circles like a plane does? It would go toward the west, and without looking as if it turned, it would come straight back. It would go like a I think think of a paddle and a ball with a rubber. And you hit the ball, and the ball goes straight out and comes straight back without a circle. And I think only a jet could fly that fast. And I am hoping I can find a good place where I can stop and really see this thing, whatever it is. And I see a wigwam, and I recognize this place, and I feel safe. I feel less in the barren hostility.
What is this place?
Wooded area.
What is this place?
It is Indian Head. I had been there before, and I feel comforted that I see a familiar place. And I think I will get a good look at this, because Betty was very annoying. She was annoying by telling me to look, and I can't look. I have to drive the car. I want to wake up.
You're not going to wake up. You're in a deep sleep. You're comfortable, relaxed. This is not going to trouble you. Go on. You can remember everything now.
It's right over my right. God. What is it? And I try to maintain control so Betty cannot tell I am scared. God, I'm scared.
It's all right. You can go right on, experience it. It will not hurt you now.
I got to get my gun.
All right. All right. That's all. Stop. Go to sleep, Steve. You forget now. You forget it now. You've forgotten. Calm now. Relaxed. Deeply relaxed. Deeply relaxed. You'll not have to make any outcry. But you can remember it now. Keep remembering. You feel you have to get your gun. This is going to harm you, you felt.
I open the trunk of my car, and I get it, and I get back in the car.
All right, just keep reasonably calm.
And I put it in my coat, and then I get out with the binoculars, and it is there. And I look, and it shifts over, and I think, I'm not afraid. I'll shoot it down if I'm not afraid. And I walk out, and I walk across the road. And there it is, up there. Oh, God damn it.
Calm down. Calm down, it's there, but you can see it, but it's not going to hurt you. Go on.
Why doesn't it go away? Look at it.
Calm. It's not going to hurt you.
There's a man. Is he a captain? What is he? look at me.
Just a minute. Let's go back a little bit now. You say it's there. Did you say it was 1,000 feet away?
Oh, no.
1,000 yards?
It doesn't look that far. It's very big. And it's not that far. And I can see it tilted toward me.
Tilted? What does it look like now? What do you say tilted? Did you see wings?
Looks like a big pancake with windows and rows of windows and lights of not light, just one huge light.
And rows of windows like a commercial plane?
Rows of windows. They're not like a commercial plane because they curve around to the size of this pancake. And I say, my God, no. I have to shake my head. I got to, it can't be true. This isn't there. Oh, it's still there. And I look up and down the road. Can't somebody come and tell me this is not there? It can't be. And it's all...
You're still asleep, but you can see it all clearly.
It's there.
You sure it's there?
Yeah.
You weren't having a dream?
It's there.
You'd had no sleep that evening?
I touch my right arm. It's not my right, it's my left arm. And then I touch my right arm, and it is my left arm. I'm confused.
You're clear now. You're relaxed.
It's still there. If I let my binoculars fall and dangle from my neck and then start over again, maybe it won't be there. But it is. Why? What do they want? What do they want? One person looks friendly. He's friendly looking, and he's looking at me over his right shoulder, and he's smiling.
Could you see him clearly?
Yes, I thought.
What's his face like? What does it make you think of?
It's round. I think of a red-haired Irishman. I don't know why, but I think I know why. Because Irish are usually hostile to Negroes, and when I see a friendly Irish person, I react to it by thinking I will be friendly. And I think this one that is looking over his shoulder is friendly.
You say looking over his shoulder. Was he facing away from you?
Yes, he was facing a wall. And
you saw him through this window? Or you said there was a row of windows.
It was a row of windows, just a huge row of windows, only divided by struts or structures that prevented it from being one solid window. Or then it would have been one solid window. And the evil face on he looks like a German Nazi.
He is a Nazi. Did he have on a uniform?
Yes.
What kind of uniform?
It was black. He had a black scarf around his neck, dangling over his left shoulder.
You pointed it out as if it were on you.
I never noticed that before.
He had a black scarf on his neck. How could you see these figures so clearly at that distance?
I was looking at him with binoculars.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Did they have faces like other people? You say one reminded you of a red-headed Irishman.
His eyes were slanted. I see it so. His eyes were slanted. But not like a Chinese.
What was Betty doing all this time?
I'm not close to her. I don't know.
You're out there by yourself now? You don't think of her. Is she saying anything?
I can't hear her.
Did you make any outcry to her, the way you did to me?
I can't remember. I don't know. I did not.
You would remember it if you did.
I did not. But I know this creature, this leader is telling me something.
He's telling you something. How? How is he getting it to you?
I can see it in his face.
Do you see his lips move? Yes?
No, his lips aren't moving.
Yes, go on. He's telling you.
And he's looking at me.
What did he tell you?
Stay there and keep looking. Just keep looking and stay there. And just keep looking. Just keep looking.
Could you hear him tell you?
Oh, I got to pull these binoculars away from my eyes. Because if I don't, I'll just keep staying there.
Could you hear him tell you this?
Oh, no, he didn't say it.
You felt he said it.
I know.
You know he said it.
Just there, yeah. Just stay there, he's saying to me. It's
all right.
pounding in my head. Just don't pull the binoculars away. God, give me strength.
All right.
Pull them down. Run. Pull these binoculars down and run. God. It says, my God, give me strength. I gotta get away. Oh. Babe.
All right.
You gotta get away, babe.
All right. Calm down.
I'm driving. I gotta get away.
How could you be sure he was telling you this? Calm down. You're still asleep. How could you be sure he was telling you this?
His eyes. I've never seen his eyes before.
But you said they were friendly. You said they were friendly.
Oh, no. Not the leaders. I said only the one looking over his shoulder.
Oh, I see. The leader was
friendly.
How did you know the other one was the leader?
Because everybody moved Everyone was standing there looking at me, but everybody moved to these levers or in the back, or they went to this big board. It looked like a board. And only this one with the black shiny jacket and the scarf stayed at the window. I'm driving.
You going back into the car now?
Yes.
You put down your binoculars, did you?
I got them down.
Yes. And you got into the car. Did you speak to Betty?
Getting a hold of myself. I'm saying, hold to myself. Now, don't panic. We got great fortitude. You can drive the car. And I told Betty to look out. The object was still around us. I could feel it around us. I saw it when we passed by the object. When I got into the car, it had swung around so that it was out there. I knew it was out there. Well, it's out there. But I don't know where.
Speak a little louder.
I know Route 3. Oh, those eyes. They're there in my brain. Oh, please. Can I wake up?
Stay asleep a little longer.
Oh.
We'll get through this now, all right. We'll get through it all right. All of your feelings, tell me. It won't upset you so much.
They're there. Isn't that funny? Oh, the woods.
Yes.
That crazy dog. Stays in the car all the time. That's funny. Stays in the car.
She doesn't bark, do anything?
No, she just stays there.
What about Betty?
I don't know.
Isn't she saying anything?
Oh. I don't understand. Are we being robbed? I don't know.
What makes you think you're being robbed?
I know it's in my mind and I don't want to say it.
Well, you can say it to me. You can say it now.
They're men. All with black jackets. And I don't have any money. I don't have anything. I don't know. eyes are there. Always the eyes are there. And they're telling me I don't have to be afraid. Is there an accident down the road? What's the red? The bright red.
Bright red?
Yeah.
What is that?
Orange and red.
Where is that?
Right down the road.
Down the road.
And I don't have to be afraid. But they won't talk to me.
Who won't talk to you?
The men.
In the vehicle?
No, they are standing in the road.
And where are you? You're in the car?
No. I'm just suspended. I'm just floating about. Oh, how funny. Float about. Just floating. Nothing. I want to get back to the car, but just floating about.
You're really floating about, or is that the way you feel?
The way I feel.
You're still outside of the car?
No.
You're in the car.
I'm not in the car. I'm not near the car. I'm not in the woods. I'm not on the road.
Well, where are these men?
I don't know.
On the road.
I don't know. I'm just floating about. Oh, geez. That's the funniest thing, Betty. Funniest thing. I never believed in flying saucers, but I don't know. Mighty mysterious. Yeah. Well, I guess I won't say anything to anybody about this. It's too ridiculous, isn't it? Oh, yeah, it's really funny. I wonder where they came from. Oh, geez, I wish I had gone with them.
You wish you had gone with them?
Yes. Oh, what an experience to go to some distant planet. Maybe this will prove the existence of God. Isn't that funny? You look for the existence of God in other planets. Were you scared? I wasn't. No, I wasn't afraid. It wasn't anything anyway. Look a very ridiculous just you and I talking about it. Yeah. Well, we're getting into Portsmouth a little later than I expected.
All right, we'll stop there. You'll be calm and relaxed. You will forget everything that we have had this period together until I ask you to recall it again. You will forget everything we have had now until I ask you to recall it again. You may wait now.
Wow. 10 minutes after 8. Didn't you bring me in here 10 minutes after 8?
Yes.
10. Where was I?
Been right here with me.
What am I cigarette? Was I about to reach for a cigarette?
Look that way. Go ahead and have one.
me to take this seat, this chair, and then I was going to reach for a cigarette. But I never reached for it.
So how do you feel?
I feel fine.
Good. You know what happened here?
I know you put me into a trance, and I know the purpose of it, but I don't know.
That's all right. We'll continue this next week, a week from today. What was it you saw down the highway?
I saw a group of men, and they were standing in the highway, and they came and they assisted me.
Okay, who assisted you?
These men.
They assisted you out of the car?
Yeah,
that's what you said? Mm-hmm.
I am only thinking of mental pictures because my eyes are closed, and I think I am going up a slight incline, and my feet are not bumping on the rocks. That's funny. I thought of my feet bumping on the rocks. And they are going up smoothly. But I'm afraid to open my eyes because I am being told strongly by myself to keep my eyes closed and don't open them. And I don't want to be operated on.
You don't want to be operated on. What makes you think of an operation?
I don't know.
You were thinking about this when you were there on the road?
I was thinking about this when I was lying on my stomach.
Where were you lying on your stomach?
I thought I was inside something, but I did not dare open my eyes. I had been told to keep my eyes closed.
Who told you that?
The man.
What man?
That I saw through the binoculars.
Was this one of the men in the road?
No.
Well, who were these men in the road? Or what part did they play in this?
They took me and carried me up this ramp.
Did you feel you were going to be operated on?
No.
Did you feel you were going to be attacked in any way?
No. I was laying on the table, and my fly was open, and I thought, are they putting a cup around my private parts? And then it stopped. And I thought, how funny. Speak a little louder, please. I thought, how funny if I keep real quiet and real still, I won't be harmed, and it will be over, and am walking, and I am walking and am being guided, and my eyes are closed, and I open my eyes, and there is the car, and the lights are off, and it is not running, and Dulcie is under the seat, and I reached under and touched her, and she is in a tight ball under the seat, and I sit back, and I see Betty is coming down the road, and she gets into the car, and I am grinning at her, and she is grinning back at me, and we both seem so elated, and we are really happy, and I'm thinking, it isn't too bad. How funny. I have no reason to fear. And we look, and I see a bright moon, and I laugh and say, well, there it goes. And I'm happy.
And that's it for tonight's show, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you guys next week.